morning to this premiere pilot episode of Hiking with David. You probably will never see this because it's a pilot episode that will never be made into an actual series, I'm sure, but just in case you are seeing this, my intention is to kind of show the beauty of the world and talk about the Bible as we go in some hiking destinations to be seen. For today, we're just in the hills here of Hacienda Heights, in my hometown, about less than 10 minutes from my house. And we're going to go up these hills and see what the trail has to offer and talk a little bit about the Bible. Let's go. Today is April 18th, 2020. Yes, we're in the middle of a pandemic, and we're supposed to be hunkering at home. And most hiking trails are closed right now, but this is not really a hiking trail that anybody knows about. It's just probably was built to be a road to service the electrical towers that are up here in the hills. We'll see in a few minutes as we climb. We've done some climbing now. We're getting some good views. Of course, it's springtime in the hills, so we have lots of nice flowers that are here on top of the weeds. This will all be brown grass in a couple of months, I'm sure. But it's kind of pretty right now. There's the electrical towers I told you about that were probably the reason for this road being here. Let's keep going. I'm up here right next to this tower we saw from the distance with a good view of Hacienda Heights in the valley below. I grew up down there since I was 5 years old, and I still live there today. Now we're going to put the camera right down here on the electrical tower. Makes a good stand for it. So let's talk about Bible reading. Have you read the Bible through all the way? You know, I did it when I was in 6th grade. When I was actually living down there on La Sabita Drive, I recall having a New English version of the Bible. And I know I read it all the way through because I was keeping track of it. I think that it had some kind of a checkbox you could mark as you read each chapter from each book. I'm glad I read the Bible through once all the way, and I think everyone should do that, especially if we claim that it's the guidebook of our lives. And yet, so many times I think we might start an annual reading program to read starting from Genesis in January, and those first few days and weeks are kind of exciting, especially the first day when you get to read about the creation of the universe in Genesis 1, first man, the flood in chapter 6, and then I think Abram comes along in chapter 12, and the story of Isaac, his son, and Ishmael, Jacob and Esau, and then Joseph dominates the last third of the book pretty much. But those are good times. Then we get into Exodus, and of course, good times continue with the life of Moses starting off. We see him growing up an Egyptian because he was taken out of the Nile River by the daughter of the Pharaoh. And we get to the story of the rescue of the Israelites from Egypt and the daring cross of the Red Sea. And then they get into the Promised Land, and we see Mount we see Moses going up on Mount Sinai, and he gets the Ten Commandments, and then we think we're really getting somewhere great because we know the Ten Commandments, we heard of those, this is fun stuff, and then the Bible gets into a lot of laws and regulations in the latter part of Exodus, I think after chapter 20, and then we get into Leviticus, Numbers, and Deuteronomy. There's still some story narrative going on, but a lot of it is the Levitical rules that the priest followed, and the story of the numbers, the counting of the tribes of Israel. It can get kind of dry, and therefore sometimes we find ourselves petering out in our reading of the Bible. We have to find it hard to get through that. Now, as a sixth grader, did I understand what I was reading in that section? No, not a lot. Of course, I knew the Bible stories from Genesis and Exodus, but when it got to the rules and the regulations, it was a lot harder to follow. And so, yet I trudged through. You know why I trudged through? Because even though I didn't really understand it, I got bits and pieces. I understood that God was speaking, and to me that was the important part. That God is speaking to us as we read His Word. I didn't understand a lot of it, but I wanted to get through it because I thought it was important, something that we should do. And then, of course, as the Old Testament continues, we get into the stories of Joshua, Judges, Ruth, 1st and 2nd Samuel. Those are all great books to read, good stories, very violent at times. But I read those, and then we get into Kings and Chronicles, Ezra, Nehemiah, Esther, and then we get into the major prophets and then the minor prophets. And those can be very difficult to read. There's some great chapters in the book of Isaiah that talk about Jesus, a prophecy of Jesus, his coming foretold, and as if it was in the past. And it's obvious that Isaiah, who was writing, I guess, like in maybe 700 or 800 BC, that he could write that. It's proof that his writings were inspired by God. And then come the minor prophets. Now, the minor prophets, I'll confess to you, I didn't understand, again, a lick of what they were talking about for the most part, except for the book of Jonah. That's one of the minor prophets. That's one of the easiest ones for kids to read. But the other ones are hard because they're just written with very strange language. And I challenge any of us today to read them and to really get a lot of meaning out of them. These are verses and books that are really helpful if we, since we don't have the time to do thorough study and look at the history and the context of what was going on at the times. This is where Bible charts and timelines and even other YouTube videos of other speakers are very helpful to understand what's going on. I recently taught a class at church on the minor prophets, and I picked that out of a number of possible topics to talk about because I realized I didn't know much about them, and I wanted that to end. And so I challenged myself to understand it. I got some curriculum, some basic Bible study curriculum that we can all find, little meant for group studies type curriculum. It didn't have a whole lot of meat in it, and I just wanted more. I wanted to dig in deep, understand what was going on. And so I read, I did a search on YouTube for the minor prophets, and I came on some great tools to help me understand what was going on. I just want to mention two of them. You might want to look at these on YouTube later or look them up online. One's called the Bible Project. A couple of guys who went to college together, they live up in Portland, Oregon area. They have put together some really well done animated videos to explain all the books of the Bible. In fact, they have a podcast. They got a lot going on, but it was particularly their podcast about the books of the minor prophets that drew my attention, that made me want to, maybe help me understand what was going on as they kind of explained the backdrop and the timeline. And, all the minor prophets kind of coincide to the kings of Israel during the time. And so it's important to know what prophet goes with what king, and they helped illuminate all of that. Then I found another video series. It's by a gentleman named David Pawson, Pawson. You can YouTube him as well. He is an English gentleman, and I'm sure the videos that I watched, he goes through every book of the Bible and kind of explains it to an audience. It's not in modern times, though. He filmed this probably in the 70s or 80s. Instead of having, a PowerPoint presentation he's talking from, he's got, the old flip chart with diagrams and sketches and, words on it. So it's kind of fun to go back in time and look at things that way. But he really helped illuminate for me what was going on in the minor prophets. So that's just the minor prophets. So then obviously we get to the New Testament now, and things get a lot easier, and we may feel more applicable to us today in our day and age. Obviously reading the 4 Gospels is great stuff. The life of Jesus, and then the story of the early church in the book of Acts, and then the letters to Rome and to the Corinthians, Galatians, Ephesians, Philippians, Colossians, all those letters. Really powerful, meaty stuff. Sometimes still hard to understand, but much more relevant, we would say, to our Christian lifestyle today. So I just want to talk to you about reading the Bible. We kind of just took a quick trip through the Bible. I didn't mention Revelation, did I? That's a whole other story in itself when you get there. But we'll maybe talk about that sometime later. Anyway, as you read the Bible, you do have to challenge yourself to stay strong and not let yourself get bogged down. I think there are many, many ways to read the Bible. You don't have to start on January 1st in Genesis. There are lots of great reading plans. Maybe the first thing you should do isn't to try to read the whole book. Maybe what you should be doing is start with the story of Jesus. Any one of the 4 Gospels is a great place to start. Or any of the letters, a great place to get advice on what a Christian life is supposed to be. So I want to challenge you to start reading and to make a point of trying to read the Bible. You don't have to do it in a year. Just do it. Do it once and say you check that off. Once you do it once, then you're free to dig in and go to different sections. You may never read it all the way through again, and you don't have to read it in order. Just get through it once. There's lots of good ways to read the Bible that are talked about on the internet. It's easy to do a search and to find something that you might want to try. And of course, if you want to try from Genesis forward, then feel free to do it. Just know there's going to be some roadblocks. As some people often say, we, when we're trying to read through the Bible, sometimes get lost in the wilderness like the Israelites did. In other words, when Exodus 21 comes along, we can get bogged down, and it might take us 40 years to get through, the next few books. But don't let that happen. Stay with it. Stay strong. If you don't understand it all, don't worry. You can come back to it. You just want to read it all and kind of know what's there. The 2 Timothy, Paul's letter to Timothy says, and this is the King James Version, which probably is maybe well known to a lot of us as a memory verse, maybe because I'm just an old guy. I know this version. But it says, study to shew thyself approved. We oftentimes think that says study to show thyself approved. I think the word is S-H-E-W in the King James. I'm sure that it means show. Study to shew thyself approved unto God, a workman that not needeth to be ashamed, rightly dividing the word of truth. The NIV version of that says, do your best to present yourself to God as one approved, a worker who does not need to be ashamed and who correctly handles the word of truth. So we should study. We should be in the Word. We should look at what it's saying for our lives. As we go down that path, I do want to make a statement, though, that somebody has said the Bible stands for basic instructions before leaving Earth. Now, what do you do with an instruction manual? You don't pore over it and spend your whole time just reading and studying the instructions for whatever it is you bought. No, you actually spend more of your time actually using the thing that you bought. Now, let's make the analogy here to Bible study. If the Bible is an instruction manual, and I don't mean to just simply minimize it in that way, I'm saying that's all that it is. Of course, it's the inspired Word of God. It's pretty important stuff. But if it does contain instructions, then we're to go about doing something about those instructions, right? In the book of James, he says, do not merely listen to the word and so deceive yourselves. do what it says. So, Matthew 28 says to go and preach to all nations, baptizing them in the name of the Father and the Son and the Holy Spirit. We're not supposed to just have our eyes in the book 24/7. We're supposed to study it, know what's in there, be close to it, and then go about doing what it says to do. Now, before I get too far down that path of saying that maybe we're spending too much time in Bible study, and I don't really think any of us are doing that, right? We're probably not spending enough time doing either, studying it or what it says to do. But Jesus did once illustrate the value of listening to God once in the story of Mary and Martha. Do you remember that story? They were the sisters of Lazarus who was raised from the dead. And in Luke chapter 10, I just realized I can't read it to you because it's on my phone, which I'm using to record this. But let's just talk about what the story says. Jesus was coming to pay them a visit, and Martha was busy making preparations, and Mary was busy sitting at Jesus' feet, listening to what he had to say. Martha got kind of perturbed about that and wanted to, point out the fact that she was doing a lot of work, to get a meal ready. People got to eat, right? And so she spent a lot of time getting the meal ready and was angry that Mary wasn't helping, that Mary was at Jesus' feet. Now, what Jesus said was pretty interesting. First of all, if you ever hear your mom say your middle name, like David William in my case, you knew you were in trouble, right? Well, in this case, he said, Martha, Martha. He had to say Martha twice to get her attention. Martha, Martha. You can kind of see him shaking his head. And he went on to say that what Mary had chosen to do was superior to what she was doing. That there's time, so much time to get everything done. And Mary was taking advantage of the amount of time that she has to be in Jesus' presence. Now, wouldn't all of us give an arm and a leg to have just a minute in the actual presence of the physical body of Jesus while it was on earth? If we could time travel, we would love to do that. Mary actually had that chance and was with him, and she took advantage of it. So you can read more about the story of Mary and Martha in Luke chapter 10 and verses 38 and following, but that's kind of the gist of it, is that Jesus pointed out to us that spending time in the Word of God is pretty important. So let's do that. Decide what you're going to do, how you're going to read the Bible, and many of you are already taking advantage of so many resources, so many different Bible studies that are available, whether they're in person or online. Right now, in the middle of this coronavirus COVID-19 pandemic at Crosspoint Christian Church, we have meetups at noon with Bruce and meetups with Mike at 8 p.m. And those are great opportunities for us to get a little dosage of the Word in our lives. So let's keep on doing what it is we can to learn about God through His Word and to show Him that we care. And now let's see if I can get myself off this hillside. All right? Take care. See you later. These are my hiking shoes. Nothing really swell and great, but they're nice sturdy shoes for climbing over rocks and stuff. Not that there's a lot of rocks on this trail. We're coming into kind of a pretty part of the hills here behind Hacienda Heights. The word pastoral or bucolic come to mind. You might want to look up the word bucolic, B-U-C-H-L-I-C. I don't know, probably not that, something like that. Just kind of pretty. Thinking this would be a good time to see a deer. And that's my trail back home. There's the towers where I was. And across the way you can see the trail that I took down into kind of a little canyon and then back out this way. And now we're going up a steep hill. Probably doesn't look too steep on camera, but believe me, that's up. In fact, it's so much up that sometimes it's more comfortable to walk backwards. For a little bit and give your legs a break. Here we are looking up at the sky. Kind of a cloudy day today, not expected to be much sunshine. I did see some blue sky break out earlier. You can see the electrical lines from the top of the hill here, and this is about as high as I think I'm going to get today. There we are looking down on the San Gabriel Valley. In the center of your screen, maybe you can see the Sheraton Hotel on the hillside at the golf course. And now we're looking towards the humble little valley that holds Hacienda Heights. Well, that does it for today's Hiking with David Bible Thoughts here in the hills of Hacienda Heights. This does it for the pilot episode. On to episode 1. Let's see what's next.